The subject of today's hearing is fiscal year 2027 budget request for the Government Accountability Office and the Congressional Budget Office. I'd like to thank Ranking Member Espiat, Ranking Member DeLauro, our committee members, Acting Controller General Brown, Director Swagel for being here today. I'd also like to thank you and your staff for the work they do to help keep Congress and the entire government function in an effective and efficient manner. Government Accountability Office fiscal year 2027 budget request totals $860 million, a $48 million increase over fiscal year 26 enacted level. And the Congressional Budget's Office fiscal year 2027 request is $76.3 million, an increase of $1.5 million over fiscal year 2026 enacted level. Thank you again for joining us today. I look forward to hearing your testimonies and learning more about your budget priorities for fiscal year 2027. I now recognize Ranking Member Espiat for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Swagel and Ms. Brown, thank you both for being here today. I want to commend you and your staff for the essential work that you do on a daily basis to support Congress and uphold our constitutional power of the purse. We are operating in a constrained fiscal environment and difficult political climate where facts and independent analysis are too often questioned. That makes the work of your agencies a lot more important, more so than ever before. Dr. Swagel, I look forward to hearing about the Congressional Budget's Office fiscal year 2027 priorities, including IT modernization and how you're addressing cyber threats and attacks, as well as ensuring Congress continues to receive objective and nonpartisan analysis. Ms. Brown, congratulations on your role as Acting Controller General. Thank you for your continued leadership at the Government Accountability Office. I am concerned about the workforce reductions outlined in your fiscal year 2027 request, even with a proposed funding increase. I look forward to having a robust discussion with both of you. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize, let's make sure I'm not skipping anyone. I now recognize Acting Controller General Brown for your full testimony. Your full testimony has been submitted for the record, and you are now recognized to provide a summary of your written testimony.
Chairman Valadao, Ranking Member Espiat, and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to be here today to present GAO's 2027 budget request. I appreciate the support the committee has provided GAO in the past. GAO continues to be a solid investment for the Congress and taxpayers. Last year, Congress and the executive branch implemented actions that resulted in financial benefits of over $62 billion resulting from our work. And there remain hundreds of billions of dollars in potential financial benefits that have yet to be realized through congressional and executive action. We are requesting an increase of $48.2 million, about 5.9%, to help offset projected increased costs. This would bring our appropriated request to just over $860 million. If enacted, this would be our first increase since fiscal year 2024, when we received a 2.4% increase. We are also seeking to use just over $50 million in offsetting appropriations for a total budget authority of $910 million. With this budget, our 2027 staff level target is 3,100, a decrease of over 450 from our 2024 level. While requiring a smaller GAO, this level would allow us to continue to shrink with the least amount of disruption to our mission and workforce. GAO's mission is to support the Congress in carrying out its constitutional responsibilities and improving the efficiency and effectiveness of the federal government for the benefit of the American people. As a nonpartisan, fact-based legislative support agency for the Congress, demand for our work continues to be robust and spans the federal government's over $7 trillion budget. Wherever the federal dollars go, so goes GAO. Our work is driven by hundreds of requests, with generally just over half coming from mandates in law and committee reports, which are our highest priority. In addition to mandates and requests, we also respond to hundreds of additional requests for quick turnaround technical assistance. In addition to the $62 billion in financial benefits I mentioned earlier, our work resulted in almost 1,300 non-financial benefits, over 670 products issued, and 1,800 new recommendations. Moreover, we handled over 1,680 bid protests and issued over 450 legal decisions. The 2027 requested level will enable us to continue to support the priority oversight areas that have been highlighted by Congress, including identifying fraud, waste, and abuse across the federal government and offering ways to prevent and mitigate it. IT and cybersecurity, science and technology and its societal impacts, national security, and healthcare. The budget requests will also enable us to continue to make modest investments in cybersecurity and advanced analytics to increase our sophistication and speed that we are able to address congressional needs. In closing, I appreciate your consideration of our 2027 budget requests. We will be issuing our State of the Nation's Fiscal Health Report soon and understand the difficult trade-offs that have to be made. GAO is committed to continuing to do its part in being a responsible steward and commits to redoubling our efforts to continue to be a solid investment and a key player in continuing to help ensure the federal government is efficient and effective for the American people. With your support, GAO will continue to provide nonpartisan, fact-based information and analysis for the Congress. This concludes my opening statement, and I am prepared to answer questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. I now recognize Director Swagel for a summary of your written testimony.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Valadao, Ranking Member Espaillat, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Congressional Budget Office's budget request. Let me start by thanking you for your continued support. CBO requests an appropriation of $76.3 million for fiscal year 2027. That is an increase of $1.5 million, or 2% from the amount provided in 2026. The request would address increased costs for pay and benefits, allow CBO to further strengthen its IT and cybersecurity infrastructure, and enable the agency to add staff in areas of especially intense legislative interest. Our mission is to provide nonpartisan analysis to the Congress that is timely, rigorous, and transparent. When legislation is heading to a vote, we provide cost estimates and real-time analysis of amendments, often hundreds or even thousands of them for bills such as the NDAA. We provide analysis and technical assistance for large, complex legislation, such as the 2025 Reconciliation Act, as we did for reconciliation in 2022 and 2021. For both sides, in both chambers, we provide the analysis that is wanted and needed at the time it matters in the legislative process. We produce budget and economic projections that incorporate the effects of legislation, economic developments, and administrative actions. And we provide analysis of a broad range of policy issues in front of the Congress, bringing to bear data and analysis from a wide variety of sources. Demand for CBO's work remains strong among congressional leadership, committees, and individual members. The additional resources would enhance our responsiveness and further strengthen our transparency efforts. In the rest of 2026, CBO will shrink from 274 in February to 268 positions. And this is to absorb ongoing costs with strengthening our cybersecurity infrastructure. I'm grateful for the subcommittee's support in providing $2.75 million in additional cybersecurity resources in the current year. The continued elevated costs for that purpose mean that the funding available for other activities remains essentially flat. For 2027, 80% of our requested increase, so that's 1.2 out of the $1.5 million, would cover increases in current employee salaries and benefits, and would enable CBO to expand staff in key areas of congressional interest. The request would allow us to start the process of increasing our staffing from the 268 we'll end up with, ultimately to 285 is my target. 6 of the additional positions would allow us to refill the vacancies that we will not replace this year. The 11 additional staff would strengthen analysis of defense and homeland security, and then of income security programs such as SNAP, would also allow us to enhance our transparency and responsiveness, expand our dynamic analysis, bolster our cybersecurity and IT further, and support our publishing and digital communications. The remaining 20% of the increase, so that's about $300,000, would address continuing cyber and IT costs. While the total cybersecurity spending would remain elevated, it would decline from this year's level because certain one-time expenditures that we had in the current year will not recur. And that's how we get to the net of an overall increase of 2%. The requested budget would support our goal to provide budget and economic information when it is most useful to the Congress. We'll support the Appropriations Committees, in particular, by providing real-time, provision-by-provision estimates of the 12 annual appropriations bills and of any supplemental appropriations bills or continuing resolutions. We will respond to thousands of requests for technical assistance and preliminary estimates, often on quick turnarounds, as committees craft legislation. Let me finish by just mentioning one transparency effort that we've been pushing especially hard on, and that's to post the code from some of our models. And we've recently posted an additional number of models that brings us up to a total of 24 models on our GitHub website. And that includes especially the code for our tariff analysis model. So in summary, to achieve our goal of being as responsive as possible, CBO requests an increase of $1.5 million. Thank you for your support. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Swagel. We'll now begin the question portion of the hearing. I'll call on members based on seniority of those present when the hearing was called to order, alternating between majority and minority, followed by members in order of their arrival. Each will have 5 minutes. I now recognize myself. In fiscal year 26, Legislative Branch Appropriations Report, the committee directed legislative branch agencies to work together to partner on common policy standards, utilizing artificial intelligence and ways in which AI may be developed and shared within the legislative branch AI working group. Questions for both of you. Please share with the committee to what extent your agency is utilizing AI to improve the processes and efficiencies of your work. Start with Ms. Brown.
Yes, so GAO is exploring ways to use AI. We have recently updated our inventory of use cases, and we've identified several use cases that are currently operational, a number that are in development, and more that are more in the early stages. So in terms of a couple of examples that we're actually leveraging AI, one is we have a tool that's called Facet, and that is the Federal Audit Clearinghouse exploration tool. So basically, that takes all of the single audit reports that states and localities are required to produce across the country. Those are shared and in the executive branch in a clearinghouse. So they're PDF files that were really not usable before without pulling each individual file, having someone go through the file. With this exploration tool, our analysts are now able to use those single audits to identify trends. We've identified persistent challenges in certain areas, severe deficiencies, and we use that to inform our audit work. So it's been able to help us accelerate identifying issues and targeting our efforts.
Mr. Swagel?
Yeah, thank you. So we've been using AI intensively for some purposes for a while now, starting with coding, that the analysts in developing models really benefit from the AI tools. There's increasing use cases, and even in the last several months, these have gotten better. So we're using it for research purposes to summarize research literature. Some of our groups are now experimenting with using AI tools to summarize legislative language. Our Medicare group especially has been pushing forward on this. It's not yet at the point where AI can develop a cost estimate, and obviously we'd have, there'd be a person at the end of this process no matter what, but I want us to push further. And ultimately, I'm hoping that we can get, basically deeper down through our backlog of requests for information by having AI tools help our analysts. I just mentioned one last thing, which is on the inbound side, we also get analysis that's clearly generated by AI, which is not always super helpful. In some sense, it takes us time to kind of
Thank
figure
you.
it out.
As we previously discussed, we know the impact that a CBO score can have on a bill's ability to become law. We understand that your agency is often hampered from being able to get complete data from federal agencies on relevant topics that could give you the ability to develop more accurate scores. In your testimony, you cited this example regarding your agency's lack of access to student loan data. How can this committee assist you with improving the responsiveness of all federal agencies in sharing this important data?
Thank you. I'll mention two things. One is the student loan data in particular needs a legislative fix. And we've been working with the Appropriations Committee, with the Budget Committee, with Finance over in the Senate and Ways and Means, and we're hopeful to have that legislative change. That would allow us to keep doing the analysis of student loan data that Congress depends on. From most of our requests, we have good cooperation from executive branch agencies, including the ones that don't always like our analysis. I would come to you with any problems if we're facing problems from from executive branch agencies.
Thank you. In your testimony, you shared that the agency will require further reductions in its workforce in fiscal year 27. I understand that you have been offering VERA, VSIP, early retirement, and voluntary separation incentives to your employees over the past several months. How many employees have accepted these opportunities to date, Ms. Brown?
To date, with our first round of VERA VSIP, we had 122 employees accept the offer. We currently have a VERA VSIP open, and I think as my last update, we have just over 45 or so people who have put in an application. They're able to withdraw the application, but that's where we stand at this particular moment.
How many employees have requested to accept one of these separation opportunities, but the agency has denied their request?
None.
None. All right. Thank you. My time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Espiat for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Brown, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm concerned about the workforce reduction outlined in your fiscal year 2027 request. After years of essentially flat funding, GAO is being forced to shrink its workforce even as demands on the agency continue to grow. Can you be specific about what these reductions will mean for the agency? What work will GAO have to scale back or cut or stop altogether?
So what it means, a smaller GAO means that they're less, it's less work we can do. So we are looking across the organization to make sure that we have done any rebalancing that we need to do once we have gone through our second round of VERA VSIP to make sure we're able to continue to staff Congress's highest priorities. So this has resulted in us really focusing on core mission activities. So our priorities are the Congress's priorities. So we are going to focus our resources on science and technology, national security, healthcare issues, fraud, waste, and abuse, government efficiency efforts, as well as IT and cyber. So it will mean that, it may take us longer to start certain things, but it's also going to require us to increase
What
the...
kind of things will take longer?
So we won't take it off the list, but it may mean that it takes us longer to start engagements. So it could impact, anything across the Congress. We'll work with committees to make sure we're working on their highest priority issues. So if a committee has multiple requests into GAO, we will work with them to prioritize their highest priorities. We treat mandates as our highest priority because they are required of us in statute and committee language. So those are the ones that we will make the highest priority.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Swagel, CBO's recent analysis show the current tariff and trade policies are rising prices on both consumer and capital goods, increasing inflation, and lowering household purchasing power. What does this mean for the American family?
Yes, we've done a lot of analysis on the tariffs over the last year, which are put in place by administrative action. As you said, our analysis indicates that those lead to higher prices and slower job creation and slower growth, and that has an effect on American families, increasing the costs they face and reducing their purchasing power.
Okay, and how will higher capital costs affect construction, housing? Housing continues to be a big issue across the country. And how will it impact housing and businesses, investment? And how does the uncertainty created by these policies impact the broader economy?
I know. So the trade modeling that we've done, which again is public and has been used by other groups, takes into account the details of the structure of the American economy and the details of the tariffs, which change frequently, but we go into the details. And so we have that effect that the tariffs are hitting the inputs that businesses use in their in their work, including housing. So they raise the cost for businesses, and then that flows through eventually to consumers. And then there's the uncertainty effect that you mentioned as well.
And so finally, what would the outlook look like if trade policies were adjusted to reduce these burdens on ordinary Americans? So this is obviously, according to your analysis, a big problem. What would an adjustment in the trade policies look like in real terms?
And of course, CBO doesn't recommend policies, but the analysis would indicate that the change you mentioned, in some sense, would attenuate or reverse some of the negative impacts, reduce inflationary pressures, reduce the drag on the economy and on job creation and family.
And obviously,
incomes.
these analyses did not include the rising oil prices and costs.
That's correct. We're watching that, and we'll provide more information. We don't yet know, in some sense, the duration or cost of the conflict with Iran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Espaillat. I now recognize Mr. Strong for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Valadao, Ranking Member, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Ms. Brown, you noted that GAO's budget has been relatively flat while personnel costs continue to rise. What structural changes has GAO made internally to absorb those increases before requesting additional funds from Congress?
The biggest structural change has been to decrease the size of the workforce. GAO's budget is over 80% people, so that's the vast majority of our costs. So that leaves us a very little percentage of the remainder of the budget to adjust. We've also taken a look at some of our engagement support costs in terms of travel costs as well as data purchases. We've also tried to limit our investment in IT spending. So we have kind of focused across the entire agency, but the biggest place we've done to try to restructure our organization is through shrinking the size of our workforce.
Thank you. A few weeks ago, you and I talked about how the federal government could be losing hundreds of billions of dollars annually to fraud. Ms. Brown, based on GAO's assessment, could you tell everyone here which programs currently pose the greatest risk and where Congress should focus oversight first?
I think when it comes to fraud, it's focusing on the largest programs, the largest and complex programs. So those are the programs that tend to be the most rich because it makes them a high target. So Medicare, Medicaid, our programs, also some of the disaster assistance programs. That becomes a target-rich environment because it's so complicated with the dozens of agencies that are involved in the process. But this is something that has to be focused on writ large across the government. And GAO has recently received a request from the chairman of House Oversight to look at this issue kind of across federal programs. So I think we'll have a much clearer picture about that once we do the across-agency review.
Thank you. You've made roughly 200 recommendations related to fraud risk management across your agency. What percentage of those recommendations remain unimplemented and why?
I think it's just under 40% are unimplemented, and I think there are a couple of factors at play. One, some of the issues to address them are complicated. The second issue is that I think agencies are only now beginning to focus on fraud as an issue. Often there's a tension between fulfilling the mission of a program and making sure there are good controls in place to make sure fraud, waste, and abuse is not happening. And we have worked hard to educate agencies as well as the accountability community to make sure they're thinking about it on the front end and not chasing after the dollars after they're out the door.
Dr. Swagel, can you walk us through what steps your agency has taken internally to control cost and find efficiencies before requesting additional resources for fiscal year 2027?
Yes, sir. We also are looking to focus on the areas of Congress's we're also looking to focus on the area of Congress's most interest and to move people around within the agency to provide the additional resources from our existing pool. So, for example, I've asked for part of our increase to hire people in means-tested programs. Within the agency, we're down a few people on that, and so we have moved people within the agency, taking people from our research side to our budget analysis side to contribute on that. So before I ask for more, I'm looking within, can I rearrange things to help out?
Thank you. Dr. Swagel, 15 years ago, affordable health care was sold to previous members of Congress and the American people as better health care at a more affordable rate. Keep your physician, you'll save more than $2,000 a year. 15 years later, none of the benchmarks were met while costs have gone through the roof. Have there been analytical changes in your office to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
Yes, it's a hallmark of what we do is we look back and say, well, what did we get right and what did we get wrong? And so for example, the Affordable Care Act, which I think is what you're talking about, there's some things that the CBO analysis missed. And so, for example, the effect of the mandate within the ACA, there's a very narrow evidence base, and CBO's analysis turned out to be off in terms of the subsequent, what happened. And so we have gone back, changed that, and our future work would reflect that.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Strong. I now recognize Ranking Member DeLauro for her 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Williams-Brown, thank you, and Dr. Swagel, for being here this morning. Sorry I was late in coming. But let me just start with you, Ms. Williams-Brown. It doesn't really go amiss that the GAO helps Congress so much. You evaluate national security, you analyze healthcare spending, so that the work created under your leadership at GAO is really crucial. We're grateful for the constant information and the data that you provide to improve the decisions that we make. And you also have the responsibility for enforcing Congress's power of the purse. So we're grateful to you for that. Let me just ask about your workforce. And despite all of the great work and information you and your agency provided Congress, funding for the GAO was almost halved last year. And it's currently, and for flat funding since 2024. As a result, almost 200 employees had to be let go from your agency. Can you tell us how this has impacted the agency, how it's impacted the operations? And letting us know, do you feel as though you're properly staffed for the amount of work that you conduct and produce for the Congress?
So the employees that separated it's happened across the organization. So it's been analysts that directly do the work. It's also been our operations and support across the agency. One area particularly hard hit has been our information technology group. They've lost a fair number of resources. So it has an impact on the organization. We've worked really hard to try to minimize that impact. If there's a critical area that we absolutely need to backfill because we're one person deep, we do that. And in terms of the impact on the direct support of the Congress, it requires us to shift, make trade-offs, and reposition ourselves to make sure we are addressing the Congress's highest priorities.
And look, I know you're trying to, and you're working at doing more with less. There's no question in my mind in what you do. But you mentioned IT as one of the areas which is impacted. But in terms of responsiveness to the Congress, you talked about issues. Where does that,
Where does it show up?
where does it show up? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
It shows up really in some ways in our responsiveness in terms of being able to get to requests. Number one priority for us, mandates, as I said before. Second priority are requests from chairs and ranking members. So more than half of our work is mandated. So that then it creates a smaller workforce for us to be able to respond to the requests from the chairs and ranking member, and it can result in longer queue times.
Okay. And so your request, you were cut by about 40% the last go around, is my understanding. The budget was almost half, and you're asking for $48 million right now.
Yeah, so it was almost. It wasn't. We were flat.
Well,
We
no,
have a
no,
flat-
it
yes.
was a cut, but then
Right.
we worked it so that
Yes,
you got,
yes,
you know,
and
that
we
you
are
were
eternally grateful.
flat funded.
Yeah.
You know, so that, and in this environment, in many instances, flat funding is a win. But that's not the point. The point is to be able to see that you have the opportunity to be able to increase the efforts and the demands that the Congress puts on you with regard to requests. So we'll keep that very, very much in mind as we look at what you're requesting. Okay, and the IT people have talked about AI, et cetera, so they're, you know, obviously, we should be state-of-the-art. Let me just ask quickly, Dr. Swagel, and thank you at CBO as well. Deeply concerned at the news of the cyber attack on the Congressional Budget Office. It's a reminder that we need to continue to be vigilant, continue to prepare for cyber threats. It can happen at any time. Today, with the funds you currently have, do you think you are fully prepared for another event like this? And as technology continues to evolve, do you feel as though the technology you currently use is adequate in this day and age?
No, thank you, and thank you again to the committee for the resources to respond to the challenge we had this year. We're in a good place now with the changes we've made in response to the incident, but we have a plan now to do better, and it's both on the hardware side and on the software side within our network, and that's just the work of the next year and then beyond. So we're working on it, but it's still a work in progress.
And what does that mean in terms of your request, your funding request, to get to that plan, to put you in the position that, you know, we don't see something like this happen again? Again, I say the same thing I said to Ms. Williams, Brown, that you're doing more with less. And you're
right.
trying to do more with less. I have a particular view, others will disagree. I don't believe you can do more with less, so I stipulate. But I'm interested to know what, I think you asked for $1.5 million?
That's right.
Is that enough?
I'll answer it.
We need to finish that one quickly because.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. We had, certain one-time expenditures this year that won't recur, and that's why we're asking for still an elevated amount for cyber activities, but less than in the past. And I think it will be enough for us.
Thank
Yeah,
you. I yield back.
All right, well, thank you. I now recognize Representative Malloy for her 5 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Brown, I had a couple of questions for you that you've already answered, and so I'm going to start with a kind of philosophical question. You said in your testimony that your job is ensuring that the federal government is efficient and effective for the taxpayer, which is a mission I very much support. And I did a little research, and when Congress created the GAO in 1921, the reason is that Congress was really alarmed that the executive branch was booming and hiring a lot of people. And at that point, there were 10 executive branch employees for every one employed by Congress. Now it's 100 to 1, and the executive branch's budget is about 1,000 times what ours is. So given the growth, size, and complexity of the federal government, how can GAO keep pace with Congress's oversight needs? Because it seems like we're just having an arms race where the executive branch gets bigger, so then GAO gets bigger, and we're just hiring more and more people, and we have more and more government outlays. And the point in the first place of GAO was to stop the government outlays going to the executive branch.
So, yes, it's a challenge. It's hard for GAO as a support branch agency to support the Congress in providing oversight for it. So it's close coordination and conversations with the Congress about their absolute highest priorities, and also around the issue of human capital. So I'll mention that in our high-risk area, one of the commonalities across the high-risk areas has to do with strategic human capital management. And that doesn't mean that more people are needed, but it's really about the skill sets of the people that are there. So we recognize the federal government's at an inflection point, and we think, we've been pushing hard to look at how programs are executed. A lot of it has to do with the complexity. So many programs have become so complicated, and Medicare is a perfect example of it's so complicated, it creates so many situations where it's ripe for, abuse and waste, because things aren't off the table, but it doesn't mean it's functioning the way it was necessarily intended. So we are continuing to push this issue of looking at the federal government, looking at programs and making sure that agencies are doing what they need to do to make sure they're functioning effectively. Because at the end of the day, the executive branch should have to make the case for why programs should continue, and it shouldn't work the other way. And at some point along the way, it's turned into the agencies no longer having to defend their existence, and the legislative branch is constantly trying to get information and decide if it still makes sense to have over 150 housing programs, for example.
No, I agree. I want to give you a hallelujah and an amen, and just say we need to be hearing from GAO more. I've noticed around here the objects in motion tend to stay in motion, and we need to question more often why we're spending money on things and why we have the personnel in executive branch agencies that we have. And we're not just here to keep funding everything. We should be doing better oversight. So thank you for that.
Can I give you an amen and a hallelujah to that, too?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Dr. Schwagel, not long ago, the House requested the CBO start using dynamic scoring for certain legislation. Can you give us an update on that, how that's going? And has it improved the accuracy of CBO estimates?
Okay, yes, no, thank you. And I heard that message loud and clear. It's from both sides. In the 2025 reconciliation bill, we did dynamic analysis at several stages of the process. One's for the bill that was initially passed by the House, and then in the February 2026 budget update, we did essentially dynamic analysis for the entire thing, as was passed by the Congress, which differed from the House version. And to get there, we did a huge amount of work, of technical work, to be in position. So I think we heard the message, and we're going to do that, so just going forward.
Thank you. And I'm almost out of time, so I'll just quickly piggyback on what my colleague, Mr. Strong, was asking about. CBO scores the bills we write, and then a lot of public opinion is formed around CBO scores, and sometimes they're wrong. And then later, when they get revised, public opinion's already hardened. And I think we need to do a better job of getting those revisions out there and making sure people have accurate information when they're making these decisions. And I'm out of time, so I will yield back.
Yes, no, I just agree, and we're continuing to work on that, and so just that feedback is incredibly important for us.
Thank you, Ms. Malloy. I now recognize Mr. Hoyer for his 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, let me ask a question first. Are we going to have a second round?
We haven't had that discussion, but I'm happy to with my ranking member, and I'll let you know.
We have the next hearing at 11 o'clock.
There's some discussion about that schedule as well. I'll let you know as soon as I know what direction we're going.
Mr. Chairman, let me say, I've been on this committee a long time, had a 20-year hiatus. Invariably, we had second rounds. The practice is now, 11 o'clock happens and we don't need any more information.
I appreciate the members' comments, but usually when we make those decisions, we make them here with my ranking member. I don't make them unilaterally. I do have those conversations, and I'm having those conversations
You walked out on the
now.
ranking member last time. There was no discussion then. I don't mean to be overly critical.
There was actually a discussion. That discussion happened. The decision was made. There was not going to be a second round. Things changed when people started turning on their mics. I gave the full committee's ranking member an opportunity to speak. She spoke, and then I saw the discussion on this side had already been agreed to with both sides that there would not be a second round. I'm happy to have a second round if that's something the ranking member would like to do so, but we had already had a discussion about rolling right into the second committee.
All right.
But since we're having this debate now, I mean, I'd prefer my ranking member and I confer and make a decision how to move forward, and then we'll let everyone know what we're doing.
Thank you.
But I'd prefer not doing that in this forum, but privately, so that we can settle this the way we should.
All right. Ms. Brown, who makes your budget request?
We do.
Is it your analysis that the request you made was what you need?
So there are a number of factors that go into the budget, so it's,
Relatively simple answer. I don't have much time.
yeah.
Do you believe that $910.3 million is sufficient to do the job that we expect you to do or that you expect to be done?
So yes and no. So it's sufficient. We think we can do it, and provide an acceptable level of service. Will it be
My question
lower than in
was-
the past? Yes. In terms of what we're able to do and the speed with which we can do it.
I agree with Ms. Malloy. We have seen an extraordinary explosion in the executive department, and the Congress continues to underfund its ability to do the oversight that the American people want. We have these hearings, and it's sort of a nice little politeness, and and you guys feel you've got to say, well, I want to defend what I'm told I need to do, which is I ask you, who sets your level? Now, executive agencies have to go through OMB, and OMB sets their levels. Do you feel constrained to ask for $910 million?
So when we set the level, we don't ignore the environment that we're in. So yes, there
Well, I
are
want you to
external
ignore it.
pressures on the budget that we request.
I personally
Yes.
don't like the environment we're
Yeah.
in, and therefore I want you to ignore and I want to ask your opinion, is $910 million, which is, by the way, 1/60th of the money that you saved, the $62 billion. So my presumption is every increment that we cut, which is Ms. Malloy's, I think, contention, that as the executive department expands, our ability to oversee it diminishes very substantially. And therefore, we don't get at waste, fraud, and abuse. Everybody is for getting at waste, fraud, and abuse. My view is most people talk about waste, fraud, and abuse like it's a huge number and they're going to balance the budget on that. We don't deal with entitlements. That's where the money is. We don't have any discussion about that because none of us want to deal with that. But what I'm trying to get at with the two of you, I think the Congress badly underfunds itself. The possibility of 18 people on our staffs being able to oversee a $5 trillion expenditure of the public's money is absurd. Thinking that you can have a shrinking budget with an extraordinary expanding expenditure and be able to keep up with waste, fraud, and abuse, or the appropriateness, forget about waste, fraud, and abuse, the appropriateness of spending on object A as opposed to object B. Life's a series of trade-offs.
It is.
And very frankly, let me tell you, I am not for dynamic spending or scoring, because I think it's a gamble. And I would rather gamble on the conservative side and saying, no, if you do this, it's going to cost X, rather than if you do this, somehow magically money's going to appear. That didn't happen in the tax cut of 1981 under Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan increased the budget deficit more than any other president in the 45 years I've been here. 180% increase in the national debt from $985 to $1.8 billion. $985 billion to $1.8 trillion. So I ask you the same question, Mr. Zweigel.
Yep.
And I've got just a few seconds left, so I'm going to ask you some more questions on the second round. I don't think the budget office has sufficient resources to respond to the members. When I was majority leader for a long period of time, members kept continually complaining to me they could not get an answer in a timely fashion from the CBO. And very frankly, if you weren't a committee chairman, the chances of getting it were much less.
That's, yes, that's still the case.
But I would ask each of you to be honest in terms of your own opinion, because we're relying on that, I am, when I do the budget, when I'm figuring out what ought to be spent. Of what is demanded of you, expected of you, and what you can and cannot do.
The gentleman's time has expired.
My time has expired.
Trying to decide. I think we're going to move into a second round. I talked to my ranking member about it, and yes, we do have those discussions usually offline, not with the microphones on, and I appreciate Mr. Hoyer for bringing it up, but I would appreciate it, a more civil approach to it, and then the way you approached it. But I'm going to give my time to Mr. Strong right now to ask his 5 minutes, and then we'll come back to the list.
Thank you. Mr. Swagel, it's estimated 15 million illegal aliens have entered America under the last administration. Can you tell this committee how that has affected the budget and the debt of America?
Yes, sir. We've looked at that both at the federal level and the state and local level. The fiscal burden is in some sense on the state and local level, right? Because education costs, policing costs, incarceration, things like that. Healthcare, exactly right, are mainly at the state and local level. On the federal level, there are costs, even after the legislation last year that restricted some of the outlays, there's still costs. The immigrants who came in generally had a strong incentive to work on the books because they faced a date with an immigration judge, say 7 or 10 years out in the future, again, if they show up in 7 years. And so that's why in our analysis, there's a lot of revenue coming in because of that incentive that the immigrants face.
Thank you. Ms. Brown, we've been told about waste, fraud, and abuse. I think both sides of the aisle agree that it's there in government. It's obvious. It's taxpayer dollars. Can you tell me how many people have been arrested in the last 12 months related to waste, fraud, and abuse that you've evaluated through GAO?
I don't have a number. I'm happy to provide a number for the record. It's something that we do look at, but this is an example of where we have to comb through Justice Department records and in some cases, state and local records. So we can
Is the
give you a
Department of
ballpark.
Justice doing enough to prosecute those that have stolen from the American taxpayer?
This is an area, I think more needs to be done. And the pandemic relief funds, they're a perfect example. SBA was given 10 years to pursue claims against people who had defrauded the government. In other programs, that statute of limitation was not expanded. So in some cases, we did not pursue those. So do I think more could be done? Yes.
What would it take to prosecute those people faster? You mentioned that more should be done. Does that mean additional funding? Does that mean additional funding to the DOJ? Where's the breakdown right now, and why is the American people not seeing these prosecutions going forward?
So I think prosecuting fraud is extremely complicated. And it's difficult to build a case, and it can take a long time. Sometimes it takes a long time to identify it, then you have to investigate it, then it has to be adjudicated. So the process can take a long time. In some cases, it's identified at the agency level. The IGs need to have the resources to be able to do the investigations and work with their law enforcement partners to bring cases. So in some cases, it's a skill. You need good analysis, and you need to be able to do kind of the investigations to build a case.
Thank you. And I concur with the gentleman, Mr. Hoyer, on entitlements. I think it's time to take it up. I think this $39 trillion debt is totally unsustainable, and we need to take it up at any level. So I join you on that, whether it's entitlements, whether it's programs, whether it's fraud, theft, and abuse, go down the list. What we've got is a debt that's unsustainable, and we've got to get that debt paid down. And right now, we're not going in the right direction. But I thank both of you for coming before us. Mr. Hoyer, I stand willing to work with you on any of those items that we can to reduce the expenditure of our budget. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
And
Thank you,
GAO is ready to support.
Thank you, Mr. Strong. I now represent my ranking member, Mr. Espiat, for his 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing us the ability to continue to ask these important questions. Mr. Swaggle, you mentioned issues relating to immigrants and the undocumented, and you referred to what may be perceived to be a social cost of their presence here. Do they contribute anything to America?
Yes, sir. We do the budget and economic analysis at the federal level. The budget impact on net over the 10-year window is a positive because the people who came in over the last several years were very heavily skewed toward working age adults, and they had a strong incentive to participate in the labor force.
And do they pay any types of taxes?
Yes, sir. So of course, at the state and local level, they'll pay sales taxes. At the federal level, there's also income tax and payroll tax that they would pay as well.
And do you have an idea what that amounts to globally, the kind of contribution in terms of taxes that they pay?
Okay, I can give you an indication. In our recent budget projections, the administrative changes in immigration policy since the previous budget update, so that's from January of last year till February of this year, we project will increase the federal deficit by about $500 billion over 10 years. And again, this is the net of some lower outlays, but then also lower revenues from the smaller labor force.
Now, you mentioned Medicaid, and each state has rules for Medicaid. Some states didn't take the additional funding that Obamacare provided for them. Some states don't provide a specific benefit for children. Others do. So, each state has its own rules. But are undocumented people eligible for federal funding from the federal government itself? Forget the states, from the federal government itself through Medicaid.
In Medicaid, I mean, there's certain funding that is still available. There's certain emergency funding. it doesn't go directly to the individual. It goes to, say, to the hospital for the services in the ER. The 2025 reconciliation legislation narrowed that funding, and we have that in our budget update, the deficit reduction from the changes in Medicaid.
So in essence, if you were to do a global analysis, what immigrants are taking from our country is far less than what they are contributing.
At the federal level, that's right. As I said, we had the changes in immigration from last year to this year will increase the deficit by about $500 billion. And again, which is the net of the changes in revenues and outlays.
So the concept that they're blood-sucking vampires that are taking everything from America is basically wrong. They're contributing a lot.
I'm sorry, I'm smiling. I could never imagine those words in a CBO report. But we would say on net, on the federal level, again, it's different at the state and local level because it's different. But at the federal level, the budget impact is a net positive.
I just want to state that there's a lot of confusion out there and a lot of peddling of wrong information that often leads America to think that immigration is bad and that is a negative thing. And your numbers show that at the federal level, it is a positive thing. It is contributing to the economy. I don't even want to get into the crime numbers, which clearly show that U.S. citizens are more likely to commit a crime than immigrants. I don't know any undocumented immigrant that leaves their home and says, let me commit a crime today and let's get deported. Mm-hmm. In fact, they try to stay within the parameters of the law and are pretty much law-abiding, much more so, according to many studies, including one by Cornell, than a regular American citizen. I yield back.
Now recognize Ms. Malloy for her 5 minutes.
I may not need the whole 5 minutes, but Mr. Schwegel, when I ran out of time, you were talking about how CBO can better address inaccuracies in initial CBO scores. Do you want to go ahead and finish that answer?
Oh, yeah, no, thank you. I was about to talk about one example in our analysis of the 2025 reconciliation legislation, which in some ways is like the mandate information that I talked about earlier, where, in the original ACA score, it just turned out differently, the effect of the mandate. And, we've revised it, and we've done that with other things. After we published our analysis of the 2025 reconciliation bill, there are several academics who came to us and said, we think you missed the impact of the provision on orphan drugs. There's several very expensive drugs that would qualify for that provision that we didn't realize. And in the scheme of things, it was about $9 or $10 billion that we were off. And this time it actually went in some senses in the Republican favor, in the majority favor, because the cost, quote, should have been higher, and we didn't see those costs. But in some sense, I was just trying to say we make mistakes in both directions, and we try to correct it and try to make sure we're not biased.
Thank you. I appreciate your attention to that because it really is everybody's always citing CBO scoring as justification for, support or not support, or whether we should repeal things. And it's just so important that CBO get it right. So thank you for that. Ms. Brown, I'm going to come back to you. Back to where we started. When you said that your job is ensuring the federal government is efficient and effective for the taxpayers. I love that. And what we're asking you to do is oversee a ballooning federal government that we keep funding. So just to be clear at what I was getting at, it isn't that we shouldn't hold GAO accountable for how your budget is used and make sure that it's, the smallest budget that does the job. I think we need to do a better job of overseeing federal outlays, with the power of the purse, and deciding what taxpayers are getting for those outlays, which is why we created GAO. I'm afraid what we actually do too often is just continue to fund things that are already happening because they're already happening. And I'd like to work closer with GAO to make sure that we are ensuring that the federal government is efficient and effective for the taxpayers, that every tax dollar that goes out of here is doing something that is good for the taxpayers and that we have a good grasp on why we're spending it. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Malloy. I now recognize Ranking Member DeLauro for her 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank again to the two of you. Dr. Schwegel, let me ask you, because there's been a lot of talk about the debt and spending versus revenue. What impact does a $4.5 trillion tax cut, without it being offset in any way, that in essence, and these are not my conclusions, you can tell, look at economists all over the country, that the tax cuts that are going to be benefiting the richest 0.1% of the people in this country and the biggest corporations. Does that have an impact on the debt?
Yes, so our analysis said that the 2025 reconciliation bill will add $4.7 trillion to
the debt.
Well, to the deficit, and therefore
To the debt.
increase the debt over the next 10 years.
So it's going to increase the debt. There appears to be no concern about that $4.7 trillion added because of $4.5 trillion to the richest 0.1% of this nation. It really is pretty extraordinary that where we go. And just a step further is that, and you're not the IRS, but there's recent reports that the issue is not spending, but it is revenue. We can talk about spending and where we can cut, so forth, but it's revenue, increasing our revenues here. And a lot of that comes from, again, we have 59 of the richest corporations in this nation who pay zero in taxes. Now, it's legal, and that has to do with our tax system, zero. And another 39 of them that don't pay what they owe. The issue is revenue. And that is a place that we ought to really be attacking and looking at how we increase the revenues so that, in fact, we can deal with some of the issues that we do have to deal with in terms of providing for the common good, which is what we do. And I would just say, Ms. Williams-Brown, that in my first round, I spoke about the power of the purse, which is really what it is that we do here. And it's based on, on a bipartisan basis. And my hope, and I'm just going to leave it this way, my hope is that the power of the purse that is in the Constitution of the United States will be adhered to, because that is a role and a function of the GAO, and will not countenance the whims of any administration to take money that has been appropriated by this body and decide it can be used for whatever they care to use it for. And my hope is that will be adhered to. And I don't care who the president is, Democrat or Republican. I am here to preserve the power of this committee, of an Appropriations Committee, and it's the heart and soul of the federal government. Without agreement, this government shuts down. But when we do have agreement, that it cannot be abrogated by an executive. I yield back.
Thank you. I'll now yield myself 5 minutes for my questions. I understand that the GAO has agreed to a future of work framework with its union, permitting employees to live and work in other locations outside of the Washington, D.C. area. I also understand that those employees who take that opportunity to reside outside D.C. area were given a grace period in which to continue to be paid at Washington, D.C. pay rates. Mrs. Brown, what is the rationale for employees outside the Washington area to be paid at the D.C. rate rather than having their salaries adjusted to the rate for their new work location?
So the agreement was a negotiation to phase in. So we do have a structure where people are paid where they live, and there was a process to get people to that level. So it was a negotiated agreement, and that was the rationale. In terms of the rationale for a remote workforce is GAO recognized that everyone who has skills and talents that we need doesn't necessarily want to live in Washington or a metropolitan area. So we wanted to tap into the talent across the nation.
How many GAO employees were paid this Washington DC rate under this grace period?
I don't have that number, but I'm happy to provide it for the record.
And do you know, so you don't know how many are still being paid?
None. The grace period's over.
The grace period is over?
Yes.
But you still don't know the exact number of how many were paid under this grace period?
Not at this exact moment.
Okay, you'll be able to provide
Yes.
that. How many employees would you be able to retain with cost savings your agency could achieve by paying all employees living in the areas outside of DC area at the appropriate locality rate?
They currently are being paid at their local rate.
Okay. With cybersecurity for CBO, in fall of 2025, the CBO was hit with cyber attack by a foreign actor. The subcommittee was informed of this attack and supported the agency's work to investigate the attack and harden its systems to prevent further attacks. Mr. Swagel, or Dr. Swagel, yesterday this subcommittee held fiscal year 27 budget request hearing for U.S. House of Representatives. In our discussion with House officers, they agreed that the greatest security risk to the House cybersecurity attacks or the greatest security risk is cybersecurity attacks. With the CEO reporting that last year her office blocked approximately 3 billion malicious attacks to the House systems. In addition to funding staff and systems to protect the House, they noted how vital it is for all members and employees to take their annual cybersecurity training. Your funding request includes $11.4 million for most IT operations, including cybersecurity. How are you also being vigilant with your employees to protect against these attacks through such programs as cybersecurity training?
Yes, thank you, sir. We do require every employee to take cybersecurity training. So that, that's an annual thing. The last year, in some sense, has been a real world class in this. And we are much more vigilant than we were before. So in some sense, we've had, both the classroom and the practical reality. And it's something that we keep working on.
All right, and then back to Ms. Brown. Quick question, follow-up is, Ms. Brown, can you please explain to us why human capital costs are increasing by over $6 million when you are planning to decrease employees by 146 full-time equivalents?
Yes. So the cost of our workforce continues to increase. We have to absorb increased healthcare benefits. We also have to absorb COLA. There are other costs, especially in a flat budget, that we had to absorb over time. So even with our 2027 requests, the requested amount supports a smaller workforce, and it goes back to over 80% of our costs are our employees' salaries and benefits.
All right, thank you. I'm going to yield back the remainder of my time. And Mr. Hoyer, you're recognized for your 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to make it clear, Ms. Brown, I'm a big supporter of yours. I think you're doing an excellent job, and I appreciate that. And I think all the members of the committee share that view. But I think you're operating under constraints that are unfortunate in terms of, because I think what Ms. Malloy says is we really ought to look at, and Mr. Strong said as well with reference to why we have this deficit. We need to look at where we are. We need to look at the growth of the executive department, as Ms. Malloy pointed out, and the infinitesimal growth that accompanied that was supposed to look after the fact that we want to make sure whatever those 100-fold folks are doing, they're doing consistent with law and consistent with efficiency and effectiveness. And it's impossible for you to do that when you have that disparate increase. So that's my point. I think that's the committee's responsibility, and I think we ought to look at that. What do you need to do it? I argue this pretty strenuously on the IRS, where we have halved enforcement And while we get more money because we have more people, we don't get nearly what we should be getting in terms of what, as the IRS commissioner said yesterday, is owed, not new taxes. Secondly, Dr. Swagel, let me speak to you. I wasn't sure of what your answer was. Are you using dynamic scoring?
We use it. It doesn't come at the front of a cost estimate, but it's supplemental information. So for example, the dynamic analysis of the 2025 legislation, it turned out to actually increase the deficit slightly because the positive effects of the legislation on growth.
Well, let me
were
stop you
outweighed.
there
Yeah,
so
please.
I understand what you're saying. You said $4.7 trillion cost.
Includes the dynamic feedback.
And what does that mean?
So
What would the baseline?
The baseline is 3.9 trillion.
3.9 million.
Yeah.
So it's more under dynamic scoring.
Is actually the deficit increase is actually more under dynamic scoring, and that's because our debt is so high. Because
Let me tell you, the premise of those who like dynamic scoring is that will be a lot less. And the reason it is because in '01, they said the tax cut was going to make us more money. In 2001, they said the tax cut was going to make us more money. And in 2025, they said the tax cut's going to make us more money. Those are the dynamic scoring proponents because they believe the economic impact of cutting taxes will spur the economy to an effect that the net will be great. It has never happened in the 45 years I've served here.
Never. That has never happened.
So that's why I'm against dynamic scoring. I'm surprised to hear your answer.
it's an unusual, I agree, it's an unusual answer. We have, in some sense, both the puts and the takes. So we have the impact in boosting growth, but the debt is so high that even just a little bit higher interest rates.
Irony is the people who are for dynamic scoring are $1 trillion plus less well off under the static scoring of exactly what the impact is without trying to figure in what is the economy going to do, which is very difficult to do because, of course, at this point in time in this presidency, we would have been led to believe that the debt is halved and that the economy was growing at 4 times the rate it is growing at this point in time, and that, of course, hasn't happened. That's the problem with dynamics. Your bet is a tough one, and you lose too often. We would have lost every time in the 45 years I've been here with dynamic scoring on tax cuts, all of which, and some very prominent economists said that wasn't going to happen, that we were going to make more money. It was baloney. And everybody who honestly looked at it knew it was baloney at the time we passed those tax cuts. $4.7 trillion. That is more than 10% added to the deficit. The debt. But it was, and of course, none of my side voted for it. So that 4.7 trillion is not on us.
Ignore it.
Now, spending and revenue. I disagree a little bit with my ranking member for whom I have unrestrained respect. We don't have a spending problem, and we don't have a revenue problem. What we have is a pay-for problem. The discipline in anybody's spending, whether it's a family or a country, is whether you pay for what you buy. And if you don't have to pay for it, and you simply want to borrow, you can buy anything you want, including spending $1.5 billion a day in Iran. $1.5 billion per day. We're not paying for that. And I'll bet you nobody is going to vote to pay for it. We're going to borrow it from somebody somehow. Mr. Chairman, this is a very important hearing because this deals with the guts of where our country is and where we're going to be 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, as to whether or not we have honest budget advice and whether or not we can make sure we're spending our money effectively. And we have a lot of questions about the little specifics but those, and Mr. Strong raised it, and Ms. Malloy raised it, I'm glad they did, the ranking member and the chair. And Mr. Chairman, this committee is looked at as sort of as an aside. I serve on a lot of those committees, like the Financial Service and General Government Committee. which deals with the revenue side. I know you're frustrated with me. I'm 1 minute and 30 seconds over time. Isn't that awful in talking about the debt of the United States of America? These are big, important issues, and they're not subject to 1-hour hearings. And I respect you, Mr. Valadao, but I am frustrated, as you can well tell. These are big, important, critical issues, and we tend to deal with them politically as opposed to substantively.
Gentleman's time's expired.
I know that.
Members may submit any additional questions for the record, and I'm going to confer with my colleagues as to when we're going to start the next committee soon, but this committee stands adjourned. Thank you.